Right, welcome back to the Morning Show right on the Rise News channel. Nigeria's fiscal transparency is back in the spotlight after the International Monetary Fund estimated that about 8.8 trillion in government spending falls outside the 2026 budget estimates, a claim that the federal government has strongly rejected. The disagreement has reignited debate over the credibility of Nigeria's public finance reporting and the true state of its fiscal position. The IMF says the unreported estimated spending at 2% of Nigeria's gross domestic product could understate the country's true fiscal deficit and borrowing needs. But the federal government has dismissed the claim as inaccurate and misleading, insisting that every public expenditure is authorized by law, approved by the National Assembly, and fully reflected in Nigeria's fiscal reporting framework. To examine IMF's finding, the federal government's response, and what the controversy means for Nigeria's economy and fiscal credibility, we are being joined by Dele Oye, former president of the Organized Private Sector of Nigeria. Great to have you. And then, Mr. Oye, my first question to you is, why is it so difficult to see a line-by-line item of that 8.8 trillion spending? Because we've not seen that in the conversation. And secondly, let me make you laugh. I remember the day you came here to point out the fact that the Chinese companies that the NNPC brought in to fix the refineries and partner of the refineries, some of them don't have the capacity. But I'm happy to admit to you and announce to you that some of those companies were already in the refineries for an inspection tour, and they might be going ahead with work as soon as possible if everything is right. I saw it right on television. Nigeria for you, ain't it? Like the British people would say. You're shaking your head.
Thank you. Well, the IMF report, like you rightly said, this is not a case of money missing, because I've seen that the thing has gone political and a whole lot of people are commenting on it. What has happened was the government overspent its budget by 8.8 trillion. And eventually, the government has explained that the reason that they've already, because of capital carryover, and also very importantly, that they have subsequently reenacted the 2024 and 2025 Appropriation Act. The issue that arises from this, so first of all, there's no money missing, but the sheer magnitude of the amount involved. This is not just a kind of adding up. It kind of shows a character whereby you can overspend by 8 trillion, which is about 2% of the GDP. That's a whole lot of money. If you put it in context, that money can do over 2,000 kilometers of roads, or pay 15,000 persons for about 2 years if you are doing a conditional cash transfer to 25,000 naira. So I mean 15 million. So you can see the magnitude. This is really the challenge that the government has, and it has several implications for our macroeconomic situation. Take, for example, the first issue of the verdict is who is telling the truth. To determine where the truth lies, we must distinguish between legality and transparency, or between constitutional and compliance and fiduciary responsibility. The government has a duty at the budget circle to make sure it puts us a number in. But like every human situation, there's bound to be some overlaps. But for this magnitude, it shows a character issue. It's not an issue of deliberate mistake, but it's a kind of a deliberate exclusion, which has been rectified. And the Honorable Minister has already said that they've taken steps to improve the situation. So we hope the government would take this very seriously. But the government has scored an own goal, because if you are in the market of borrowing, you have to be seen to be transparent. And to say you forgot this magnitude, and if you remember, the June report of the IMF, Article 4, they raised this issue of 2.7 trillion that was not captured by the Accountant General on the capital spending. So if you link that with this, you can see that there's a flow from there to this. And it has several macroeconomic implications. It gave the impression of deficit illusion that it was 4.4 trillion. That was the deficit that was supposed to be dealt with. But now it goes to 6.4. And this is above the West African average, which is put at about 3% of GDP. And secondly, also, it also increases the cost of borrowing, both for the government and the private sector, because the government now has to look for more money beyond what it initially budgeted for. And this was one of the concerns IMF expressed, that when you don't account for it at this budgetary stage, you have a situation where the National Assembly don't have sufficient oversight, and there's no coordination between the central bank macro policies on monetary policies and the fiscal policies. So when there's no such coordination, it creates overlaps, and governments continue in the market borrowing. And I can also tell you one secret, that the government and the IMF have been in secret romance since 2023 to 2025. And this romance, they've grown our GDP, GDP from net GDP from 399 in the late 2023 to almost 772% in 2025. So what has really caused this fight? It has to do with the 5 billion UAE loan. That is where the war started. And I encourage all the parties, because everyone is impacted, both at the manufacturing level, agriculture, trade in goods and services. And it's the fintech sector is the least impacted in this situation. But opacity is never good. It's not a currency for someone borrowing.
Dele Oye.
Yes, sir.
There's a problem here. Now, you have agencies of government saying that they are not being funded. Maybe Ministry of Agri, maybe Bank of Industry, maybe Bank of Agriculture. Ministry of Health also doesn't get some of the due allocations under budgetary allocations. And then here comes IMF saying that there is 8.83 trillion naira that is off budget spending. Where is that money going? And why is the Office of the Accountant General asleep? Why is the Auditor General's office almost non-existent? And where is the National Assembly, whose job it is to process appropriation budgets in the first place? And now the Minister of Finance says, oh, there's no shadow budget. Do you believe Taiwo Oyedele? And do you think that, as the IMF is arguing, there's a lot of opaqueness in the management of Nigeria's public finances? Because that's basically what the IMF was saying by pointing to what looks like a shadow budget. Who is spending that money? And why is, funds, why is it that funds are not being processed through the ministerial line?
I will expect the Honorable Minister of Finance to have dwelled in details on a line by line of what these items are that led to this 8.8 overlap. But we are still waiting. We hope the initial response was to say no money is missing. I saw a very beautiful green paper all over the internet yesterday, where the ministry made every effort to explain that no money is missing. But what Nigerians need now is to find out that they've even been prudent. Because like the IMF pointed out in that report, it said there's no coordination. And even when the National Assembly approved it in retrospect, when they went back to pass the two Appropriation Acts, there was no enough oversight or opportunity for them to debate these issues, to be able to know what is the impact of what exactly they were approving. And I feel very sorry for the central bank governor, who has maintained a very hawkish monetary policy, tightening the nose at 26.5% MPRO, only for the Ministry of Finance to be on a spending spree, while the private sector is being held down by high interest rates, as we've seen. Like I've always said from time to time, government need to prioritize. One of the biggest problems we have in Nigeria, and what is affecting us, you can see from the Q1 tax, that manufacturing has gone down. The collection from manufacturing has gone down substantially. And if you don't have a serious industrial base, you cannot grow this economy. If the industrialists are not able to go back to work, access reasonable price capital, if the government reduces its own deficit financing and playing too much in the space of overcrowding us from the financial markets, you will see that this economy will grow and you would collect more taxes from the profit of the private sector. But the government, as still wants to be dominant, And now they're not even telling us what these line items are. And I think every Nigerian would deserve that explanation so that we can know whether indeed they've prioritized the job of the people. Like I've told you, if you put this in context, that money can do over to...
How does the minister, your question, I don't understand it. How would the minister give you line-by-line budget reports when he has said very clearly that there's no budget, shadow budget, and that the Nigerian government has followed its own fiscal procedures? He already addressed that. So I think you're asking for too much because he says, you know, IMF is being misrepresented.
No, I answered that, Dr. Bati, I answered that. I said there's a difference between legality and transparency. The government has provided a legal answer, but is it transparent? Is it, if you have a fiduciary relationship, so you are in a relationship, you cannot say, oh, I kept my books, I only forgot the last page. That is what they are telling us. And in fact, I've done the right thing by compiling it properly. That is not enough. They need to go further so that we can actually assess if that spend of 8.8 was paid on our priorities. This is what I meant.
All right, thank you.
The Honorable Minister needs to further give us more information on that.
Okay.
So, and I think in a nutshell, the government needs to be more careful because this is like scoring an old gold. The government is in the market borrowing. And because of... Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Briefly, as we round off this interview, and yes, that call was made earlier around the provision of more detail, just again to engender trust. But on a final note, going forward, because what we want is to strengthen fiscal credibility, what must be put in place so that we don't have to have cases like this where there's a question mark around whether or not there was some form of hidden agenda, for want of a better word, and then to ensure that Nigerians truly get the accountability that they deserve?
The government needs to be more transparent.
How?
It needs to have more independence. No, the way the budget circles, there should be a link between all the relevant offices involved. Take, for example, between the Accountant General, Ministry of Finance, National Planning, and the National Assembly. And there should be a kind of where you can independently assess. You go to a website to track what they are doing. Because they've tried to say they are transparent. How they manage to forget 8.8 trillion and how to be reenacting and redoing it, it doesn't make us look serious. And that's one of the biggest mismatch that came out of it, which the IMF pointed out, is that if you don't capture it like this, you will not be able to know the exact borrowing needs that government will need to fund the budget. So it becomes, you have become reactive instead of having a carefully planned process. So, and that is the biggest problem here. And when government pumps this kind of money into the system, it's straight inflation. And it kind of changes the dynamics for us in the private sector. Because when government overspends, you are putting more money into a system without the appropriate goods and services. So naturally, it's a direct inflation for all of us. So those of us that are carefully do business, we are affected when government becomes a bit reckless like this. So I think they should avoid things like this. Even if you are going to make mistake, it should be within a reasonable margin. And we're already going towards the debt to GDP now, which we already projected before it will be at about 55 in 2028. We might actually be getting there even before then. I know what that means for all of us. It means higher borrowing costs, higher cost of doing business, and it affects both the private sector and the public sector. So that is why government must be more careful. How does it do it? You need to have more independent people in the room. If you have a yes man all the way, it's difficult when you are making mistake. Then you have a situation where you are not able to correct yourself. But when people come to praise you on your mandate every time, they don't remember that they have to also check that the right things are being fixed. So government needs to have more independent people in the room.
Okay, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Dele Oye, for joining us again on The Morning Show.